Hey YouTube, today I've got a 2000 Nissan Frontier crew cab in the shop. This one's a four-wheel drive model with a 3.3 liter V6. So the reason why it's in the shop today is because it has worn out upper control arm bushings. These bushings, as far as the dealers told me, the bushings are no longer available for the upper control arms. So despite the fact that this truck's got tight upper control arm ball joints, we're gonna go ahead and replace the entire upper control arm, new bushings and ball joints and all. The arms are still available as an assembly through the aftermarket. So I figure this is probably how most of you would deal with the job anyway. To put the new bushings in would have required a press and whatnot. So anyway, we'll get started here. First thing I'm gonna do is jack the vehicle up, put some jack stands underneath the frame, nice and secure, and then we'll pull the wheel off. Once I get the wheel off, I'll go ahead and resume the camera from there. Okay, as you can see here, I've got the wheel off. The vehicle is supported by jack stands and a jack. Here is the upper control arm assembly. That is the unit that we will be replacing. So the first thing that I always do on these is I mark the eccentric bolts. This is where your alignment shop will, this is how the alignment shop adjusts your camber and caster. As you can see there, I've got paint marks on the eccentric bolt to just kind of help line up where all of these eccentrics are. You know, reference marks so that when we get it put back together, it's as close as we can get it to prevent tire wear and whatnot before we take the vehicle to the alignment shop. So process is pretty simple at this point. We're gonna loosen these nuts here on both sides. You'll have to back it up with a wrench. The size that we'll need here is 22 millimeter. You'll have anti-lock brake wiring, brackets that you'll need to remove, 10 millimeter bolt here on the knuckle, and then one underneath the control arm right about here. These ones here tend to break, so you might want to have a new bolt ready to go. I believe this is an M8 1.0 bolt, but once I get it out, I'll mention what size it is just after I've checked it. So I'm going to go ahead and break all of these loose. I don't think I'm going to do that on camera, but we'll see. This nut here on the upper ball joint is held in with a nut that's a 22 millimeter also, but it has a cotter pin. So we'll have to bend the cotter pin and get it out of the way so that we can turn that nut. So I'll get back to you as soon as I get that done. Okay, I just got the cotter pin mostly out of that. It's pretty seized in there because this is a 20-year-old Alaska truck, kind of crusty. So I got the nut broken free. Unfortunately, you can't really fit a gear wrench in there all too well, nor can you fit a socket if the CV joint's in the way. But generally, these aren't on terribly tight from the factory. As you can see, I also got the ABS line loosened from the control arm and the steering knuckle. It's a pretty slow process. Eventually, we'll get this to nut come off. What I'm fighting now is the remnants of the cotter pin that I was not able to remove. The factory cotter pins aren't all that strong, so you can just, as long as you get it started, that cotter pin will break off the rest of the way. In fact, you might even be able to see it, maybe. Oops. You can't see it from that angle, but there's a little nub of it still sticking out. this point, we could put the gear wrench on it. So that bolt is off. Now we're going to work on the upper control arm cam bolts. So here's one up here. Try to get more light on the subject. You can see I got this one most of the way off already. Okay, that's off. We'll work our way to the other one, which is right here. Get you resituated. So there's that one. That came loose. Maybe we could fit the gear wrench on. That all the way. So we're gonna have to suffer this one too because the brake line's in the way and I don't feel like taking it off to be able to fit a ratchet in there. But surprisingly, it's coming off so far. One thing I will note is sometimes, especially if you're in a rusty environment like this, sometimes these cam bolts get stuck inside the sleeve on the in the control arm. So prepare to replace those in the event that you have one that's stuck. So what I normally do is I'll thread this back on a couple of turns and see if I can give it a whack with a hammer. Of course, that side I can't do with the brake line in the way, so I'll do the other side real quick, see if I can get it moving. So I'm threading the nut so that it's flush with the stud, so that when I whack it with a hammer, I'm not going to end up mushrooming the stud. See if we can finagle this guy in and out. Or if we're gonna have to cut this thing off. Oh my goodness. That one's starting to move. All right, I think in time I can work with that. All right. So next up, before I try to pop this upper ball joint, I'm gonna put the jack under the control arm and lift it until the ball joint's not got so much pressure on it. So we'll lift the control arm up. We will keep an eye on the jack stand. We do not want to lift the vehicle off the jack stand. And we'll get that so that the ball joint isn't binding quite as much. You'll see here in a second. straighten the wheel back out. All right, you see how I've got pressure on that lower control arm. What it does here is that it relieves a little bit of pressure on that upper ball joint so that we can put the pickle fork here, give it a few raps of the big hammer, and pop that loose. So I'll put you down. I'll go grab my pickle fork and we'll resume the camera as soon as I'm ready for you. Okay, here's the pickle fork that we're using, ball joint remover. This is an old KD Tools one that I've had for 20 years or so. So anyway, we'll move the ABS wire out of the way and we will stick this kind of right here so that it's pushing the upper control arm away from the knuckle. When you use a pickle fork, this will destroy the ball joint boot, so do not do this if you're planning on reusing the ball joint. But since we're replacing the whole control arm and that new control arm comes with a new ball joint, we're not worried about it. Okay, it'll take a few good whacks, usually it'll pop right off. Of course, this one's stubborn. Holy smokes. Whew. Sometimes it helps to give the knuckle a good wrap here, kind of shake things up. But it's being stubborn. Unlike the other side that I've done already, that one just fell apart. So we'll continue on, I guess. And as you can see there, the ball joint has finally separated from its knuckle. Sort of just lay it aside like that. And now we can work on getting the eccentric bolts out of the control arm. Let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that we can get these bolts loose. So I'm just gonna work on it with a wrench. I might spray some penetrating oil in here to help with things, and we'll get back to you. Okay, so once you get your control arm bolts out, I might show you some footage here because it was quite the process here. We ended up having to cut the control arms off of the vehicle with a cutting torch. So I don't have the old control arm on me at the moment. It's outside cooling off. But we ended up cutting off the control arm at the pivot point here because these are the original bolts, but the bolts were seized to this bushing inside. So I highly recommend, if you live in a corrosion state like Alaska or Midwest or something, put some anti-seize on these bolts. Your alignment guy will thank you later. So we're at this point here where we can start reinstalling the control arm. I still have a floor jack underneath the lower control arm to keep the suspension pushed up a little bit. That'll help us get the ball joint in. So what we'll do here is we'll put the ball joint in its socket here on the steering knuckle and go from there. All right, so what I like to do first is because everything here kind of moves, I will actually just mount the upper ball joint in here very loosely, just and put the nut on just by a couple of threads. You don't want to put it on by more than a couple threads just because you want everything sort of loosey-goosey so you can get everything to align. Oh, excuse me, you've got planes flying overhead all over the place. It's bear viewing season. So, next thing we want to do is we want to push the control arm into place, while carefully juggling the bolts. Let's see if I can do this. All right. We're not worrying about our alignment marks for right now. We're just simply trying to get the bolts in place. Now, where did I put the other one? I will have to fast forward through this part. There it is. It's right in front of my face. So again, anti-seize on the bolts. Your alignment guy will love you if you do that. So you can take the shock absorber out, that helps, but most of the time on these Nissans, I don't even bother. That I can reach around, slam everything home. Bam. Okay. So now on the other side, we got these washers, the eccentrics. We'll put these on the appropriate sides, whatever side we took them off of. And we want to make sure they're clocked the same way as the other side. So if the bolt opening is at the bottom, you want to make sure that on the bolt side, the bolt head side, if the bolt head's on the bottom, you want to make sure to put the washer on the bottom. You don't want to have it crisscrossed where one side's offset to one side and one's off to the other. You want them both the same way. Hopefully it didn't just get in the way of the camera. And then we'll run our nuts down. We don't want to go overly snug just yet. We're just simply getting everything aligned and screwed on so that we can eventually torque it down. Okay, so we're gonna just do an initial torque. We do not want to torque these bolts down just yet. We want to make sure that the suspension's more or less at ride height. We may have to jack the lower control arm up just a little bit so that the frame, the jack stands coming off of the frame just barely. That'll get the suspension more or less where it needs to be at ride height, or where it is at ride height. If you tighten these bolts down when it's at full droop, if you tighten the bolts down when the suspension's at full droop, once you lower the vehicle, you're going to end up stressing these bushings. It'll put a twist in those bushings and they'll fail prematurely. So always important to try to get the vehicle as close to ride height as you can before you torque these down, before you do a final torque. So I'm going to go ahead and snug them down, not to the point where the bushings are tightened overly much. Just enough to get this play out of here. Yeah. Still want to be able to turn the bolt. initially. But we will try to get it as close to our marks as possible. All right, that's close. Now we'll work on this one. Still want to be able to move everything. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna tighten the ball joint here. Sorry I don't have a better view for you. I just don't have a whole lot of space, but the nut here, this one right here where my middle finger is, that's the nut that we're gonna be tightening down. This is also a 22 millimeter. Nissan's nice and easy. They generally don't change bolt sizes too much. So, I'll get that going. These are kind of long-winded. Unfortunately, my gear wrench doesn't fit here. The head's too big. Otherwise, I'd make this would be a real quick job right here. Okay, once you get to the point where the nut is snug, I'll link the torque spec in the comments. You never want to loosen the nut to get to the hole that you put the cotter pin through. You always want to tighten to it if you're not already on it. And I don't know if you can see, but the nut needs to go a little bit tighter to line up with the hole. Just a little bit more. Okay, we're pretty much there. So then you take the supplied cotter pin. You never reuse these, but the new control arms generally come with one. You want to stick it through the hole so that once you bend these tabs over, they're facing backwards. That way, if you're out four-by-ing in the grass or something, you're not going to have grass getting caught on your cotter pin. You don't really need to have it pointing backwards, but it's just sort of a pet peeve that a lot of technicians have, including myself. So we'll go ahead and push it through and then bend the tabs over. All right. This basically just keeps the nut from walking off in the event that the nut gets loose. And again, you want to stick it out in a way that, or stick it in there and bend it in a way that once it's bent and secure like this, the tabs are facing towards the rear of the vehicle. So that's done. I'm gonna go ahead and, oh sorry, the fender flare is in the way. I'm gonna go ahead and bolt the ABS wiring back to the control arm and the knuckle. I did break the bolt on the original control arm. I did find a nut, I did find a replacement bolt that's the same size. It is a M6 bolt, 1.0 thread. The length, let me see if I can find the length for you. So the length is 16 millimeter, which these break a lot, but not to worry. The new control arms have a new hole and threads in the control arm already. Just have to line it up. And since you guys are kind of in my normal view, I can't see that very easily, but we will go by braille. There we go. Thread everything by hand so that you can ensure that you're not cross-threading. Okay, I finally got it started. So I just want to torque it down until it's snug. All right, it's pretty snug. More bolt left on the knuckle right over here. Get that started. So now that we've got the ABS wiring all tightened and secured, the next step is to jack the lower control arm, or put a jack under the lower control arm and jack this up until the vehicle just starts coming off of the jack stand. For obviously reasons, you don't want to come completely off of it, but you just want the pressure off of the jack stand. So I'm going to go ahead and pump the jack up here, and you'll see this control arm come up a little bit. Okay, so we're more or less at the vehicle ride height, and we can go ahead and tighten the 2 bolts down on the control arm. This is the point in time where we need to make sure that our marks on the cam bolts or the eccentric bolts line up with our marks that we made at the very beginning of the process here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll tighten the bolts down, and all torque specs will be listed in the comments below. Double check that with a torque wrench later. Okay, I'm gonna have to move you so I can do this to the other side. All right, so those 2 bolts are tightened. All that's left now is to put the wheel back on, torque the wheel down with a torque wrench. Again, torque specs will be listed and in the video comments here. I believe it's 95 foot-pounds on these Nissans, but I'll have to double check. Jack the vehicle up off of the jack stands, remove the jack stands, drop the vehicle down, and send it to an alignment shop. Despite having our own little marks there, that just gets us in the ballpark, close enough that you can actually drive it to an alignment shop without worrying too much about killing your tires. Oh, before I forget, let's show you my alignment marks. So basically I made a couple of marks. Probably can't get the right angle here to see that one. But I can assure you that it's as close to my marks as I can get. So yeah, that little trick of making scribe marks or paint marks it really helps out getting the vehicle pretty close to where it was originally. The alignment person probably won't have to fight it quite as much now that you've got it close. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and put the wheel back on, and we'll conclude the video here. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. If you like the video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you have any comments or questions or concerns, go ahead and leave those in the comment section below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so you can see more content like this. Thanks, and have a great day.